The problem we had is that on the Thursday morning at 6:30 a.m. they released all of these documents on parliament.uk, and there was sort of a good side to this and a bad side. The good side was that it made it incredibly easy to scrape. So it took sort of 20 minutes to put together a screen scraper that could loop through all of the MPs, figure out all of the links to their documents, and build up a massive list of 5,200 URLs to PDF files that we needed to download and load into our system. The bad news is that when we opened up one of those PDF files, we found that it was in almost the exact format we were expecting. Only I'd assumed that it was going to be A4 pages. The PDFs they published were A4 pages for the most part, but some of them were A5, some of them were cropped, some of them were landscape. Basically, whenever they had an invoice that wasn't A4, they sort of scanned it in a weird shape and they put it in a weird angle. And it meant the technique we had for loading files into the system wasn't going to work. We also had the problem that when we did run our tools over these PDF files, they threw lots and lots of errors and claimed the PDF files were corrupt. Actually, it's a piece of open source software called GhostScript, which we were using, and it threw an error saying, this PDF was created by, I forget the name of the software. You should tell the author of this software that they're not conforming to the PDF spec. It was a fantastic piece of sort of open source passive-aggressive error messaging. But the fact that because they were corrupt, it was taking 5 minutes at 99% CPU usage to process a single document, and we had 5,000 documents that we needed to go for. So we had this application sort of ready to go, and we've got 5,200 PDF files, and the files don't fit into the app. At this point, we resorted to a very sort of responsible, tried and tested software engineering technique of dropping everything else. The email came around from Mike Bracken, our technology director, to get this thing out no matter what. So we ignored all other commitments, and we ended up, we knew we had this problem, so we put 2 teams on it to solve it. We had a couple of guys with Java and iText, which is a Java library for processing PDFs, and IntelliJ, who were trying to put together a sort of Java code that would convert these PDFs, rotate them the right way, crop them down to A4, all of those things. And we had, I think it was one chap with Photoshop and AppleScript and 15 Apple Macintoshes lying around that nobody else was using. And the 2 teams basically, from 10 o'clock in the morning, they started work on this thing and they were racing to see who could finish first. The chap with Photoshop and AppleScript, which should never be, AppleScript apparently should never be undervalued, got there first, and he was the first person to get documents coming out that looked okay. And so we used his code to do I think the top 30 MPs, the cabinet officers, people like that, and got those loaded into the site. The site had not gone live at this point. The Java thing was finished about 5 minutes later and was a lot easier to automate. So we ran that overnight, crunching all of the other documents. Then we had the problem that we had an application which we'd never actually tested against real data. We had Frank Field's documents in it, and that was it. And The Guardian does have extremely high standards, and is not a place that puts out software without having tested it at all. So normally this kind of thing would go to the QA department, and they'd spend, for an application of this size, they'd spend 1 or 2 days going through it and really stress testing it. At this point, it was 12 o'clock. It was 12 o'clock lunchtime. The story had already started breaking. Other newspapers were writing stories about it. We were writing stories about it. If we didn't get the thing out that day, then we'd lose an awful lot of the momentum that we could have expected. So we put the entire QA team up, and we got them to blitz through it as fast as possible. In the end, they QA'd the whole application in 1 hour and 45 minutes. They were filing bugs, and we were fixing bugs, and we had people literally running backwards and forwards between the QA team and the development desk. Doing triage on the way and figuring out which bugs we could fit up with and which ones we couldn't. And so it was now, I think it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We had an application with documents in it. QA had been over it. It was sort of deployed. We did the deployment for this on Amazon EC2. It was the first time we'd ever used Amazon EC2 at The Guardian. It was actually the first time we'd used MySQL for a live project at The Guardian, the first time we built anything in Django, and the first time we've done a launch project that we've written in 4.5 days. So it was kind of a first on a lot of different fronts. And the QA team, so the one thing we hadn't done was load test it. We had it up and running on EC2. We'd had a few people clicking through it, but we really had absolutely no idea if it was going to withstand the load or not. And the snap decision was made to go live and load test it with with the entirety of the world hammering on us all at the same time. So we did it. We went live. We launched it via Twitter. I tweeted at I tweeted about 2:30 in the afternoon. I was strategically retweeted by other Guardian users.
What is your Twitter handle?
Simon W. It's on my first slide, but of course we haven't got slides up. So yeah, I tweeted, I was retweeted, and 3 minutes later the site crashed. And it turns out the reason the site crashed, it was a dumb configuration error in the way we had it set up. It was one setting that we'd forgotten to change in our database configuration file. We fixed that and crossed our fingers, and the site started actually working, and people started viewing it, and the load on the single machine we were running on started going up and up and up and up and up. But it was more or less holding steady, and the application appeared to be working. By that point, the Java code we had the Java code up and running. We had another 70,000 pages of documents to go. So we pushed those into the system, and it started crashing again. Because it turns out, well, for one thing, I forgot we had in database indexes. So as long as the database tables were really small, everything was fine. But the moment they got actual information in them, it started crawling. And it turns out we had some incredibly inefficient database queries right there on the homepage, which again didn't show up until we'd started adding more data in. So we basically spent the next day and a half performance tuning. When I say performance tuning, it was really fighting fires. We'd load a bit more data in, a new bottleneck would come up, we'd solve that bottleneck, we'd load some more data in. By Friday lunchtime, we had all of the data in there, and we'd also moved to 2 machines. A nice thing about Amazon EC2 is you can fire up another machine if you need to. So we had the database server running on a separate box, a separate virtual box at that point. And it more or less, we found one last bottleneck, and it's been more or less ticking over ever since. Now, the problem we've had with this application is that it's about MP's expenses, and the problem with MP's expenses is everyone in the country is bored sick of them. So I've got a couple of graphs here, which I can probably we might be able to make this one out. This is a graph of the number of unique contributors on the site. That's judged as somebody who's voted. You can see that it's quite fun actually. You can see sort of spikes where we got slash dotted. You can see where people went to sleep and woke up the next morning. But that graph, for the first week, it sort of kept on going up, and it's basically started flattening off since then. But a much more interesting graph. This shows the number of votes per user. So loads and loads and loads of people voted once and then gave up. Some people voted twice and then gave up. And then as you go down the graph, you can see that quite a lot of people made it to the sort of 100 votes. They reviewed about 100 pages before they got bored. But there's a very small number of people, I think when we get down to here, it's sort of 60 or so, who just kept on going. So we're doing a second version of the application, and the idea there is that we're not linked to from the Guardian homepage anymore. We're not going to get huge numbers of people coming through the site, but there are a small number of people who, for some reason, presumably they're just absolutely furious about the whole MP's expenses thing. And so from their and if we can give tools to harness that pure anger, we've got a much better chance of digging through the rest of the documents and getting a really useful result out of that. So keep your eyes on the site for next week or so. We've got a big new release coming up, which will emphasise some of the game-like aspects, so people will be able to challenge themselves to complete 3 more documents. And we added a high score table to the homepage several days after we launched. We didn't want to have it there right at the beginning because we thought it would encourage sort of bad behaviour on the site. And actually, it turns out that high score page just meant that there were 4 people who saw that they were competing on the high score page, and they went completely nuts and spend hours and hours and hours churning through things. So if we can hook more people like that, we've got a much better chance of digging through all 450,000 pages of document.